My dad used to say it like it was a fact, not an opinion like gravity or taxes, or the way my sister always got everything she wanted. "You're just not built for success," he'd tell me, shaking his head across the dinner table while my mom stayed quiet and my sister smirked into her wine glass. And for years, I let them believe it. I showed up in the same old clothes, talked about my slow shifts, laughed off their comments like they didn't sting. Because the truth would have ruined everything too soon. Last month at my parents' anniversary dinner, my dad raised a toast, to my sister's promotion of course, and then glanced at me like I was an afterthought. "And hey," he added, "at least one of my daughters made something of herself." Everyone laughed. I smiled too. I always did. But then my sister pulled out her phone. She said she'd been curious about the company I supposedly worked for. Said something didn't add up. And when she turned her screen toward the table, everything went silent. Because right there, in bold black letters, was my name. And underneath it, a deal none of them were supposed to find. I didn't correct them that night. Not when my dad kept going on about how hard work actually pays off, clearly directed at my sister. And definitely not when my mom gave me that tight, polite smile like she was embarrassed for me just sitting there. I gotten used to it. Years of being the disappointment does that to you. It teaches you how to stay quiet, how to shrink just enough to make everyone else comfortable. And honestly, it worked in my favor. Because while they were busy underestimating me, I was building something they couldn't even comprehend. But my sister, she was different. She didn't just accept things at face value. She questioned, she dug, she needed to be right. So when she leaned forward that night, her eyes locked on me instead of her phone, I knew something had shifted. "This doesn't make sense," she said slowly, her voice cutting through the table chatter. My dad frowned. "What doesn't?" She turned her phone toward him first, then my mom, and finally back to me. "Why is your name listed as the primary owner on a multi-million-dollar acquisition?" she asked. And just like that, the version of me they had believed in for years started to crack. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried alone. My dad didn't laugh this time. He didn't make a joke or roll his eyes or brush it off like one of my little phases. He just stared at the screen, then at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't even realize he'd been ignoring for years. That's not possible," he said finally, his voice low, almost defensive. My sister didn't look away from me. "It is," she replied. "It's a verified filing. Her name, her signature. This deal closed 3 months ago." My mom's hand tightened around her glass. "Sweetheart," she said carefully, "is this some kind of mistake?" And that word mistake almost made me laugh. Because that's what I had always been to them. Not misunderstood. Not underestimated. Just a mistake. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap like I had all the time in the world. "No," I said calmly. "It's not a mistake. That's when everything shifted. You could actually feel it. The air changed." My dad sat up straighter, his tone sharpening. "Then explain it," he demanded. "Because last I checked, you were barely getting by waiting tables." There it was again. The version of me they clung to. The version I had let them believe in. I tilted my head slightly. "That's what I told you," I said. My sister's brows pulled together. "So you lied?" she asked. I met her gaze without flinching. "I protected myself," I corrected. My dad scoffed. "From what?" "Your own family." And for the first time that night, something inside me hardened instead of shrinking. "Yes," I said simply. That answer hit harder than anything else. My mom blinked rapidly like she was trying to process whether she heard me right. My dad's face darkened. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "We've done nothing but support you." I didn't even react to that. Because arguing about the past with people who rewrote it to fit their narrative? That was a losing game. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Not to prove anything, I didn't owe them that. But because if the truth was already out, I wasn't going to let them twist it into something small. I unlocked the screen and tapped once before sliding it across the table. My sister grabbed it first. Of course she did. Her eyes scanned quickly, and I watched the exact moment her confidence cracked. This is a portfolio," she whispered. My dad leaned over her shoulder. "What am I looking at?" His voice had lost that edge. Now it sounded uncertain. Careful. My sister swallowed. Multiple properties. Commercial, residential, all under her name. Some through holding companies. My mom covered her mouth. "How much is this worth?" she asked, barely audible. My sister didn't answer right away. She kept scrolling. And the longer she looked, the paler she got. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "It's not just one deal," she said. "It's everything." My dad straightened slowly, like his body couldn't keep up with what his mind was trying to process. "That's not possible," he repeated, but this time it sounded weaker, almost like he was trying to convince himself. I crossed my arms loosely. "You stopped asking questions about my life a long time ago," I said. "So I stopped offering answers." That landed exactly where I intended it to. My mom's eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name, guilt maybe, regret. But it was too late for that to matter. My dad ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly beside the table now. "No," he muttered. "No, this doesn't just happen. You don't go from nothing to this." I held his gaze. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't just happen." And for the first time in my life, he didn't have a comeback. My dad stopped pacing, but he didn't sit back down. It was like the ground beneath him wasn't stable anymore. Like the version of reality he'd built his confidence on had just cracked wide open. "Then how?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but sharper in a different way. Not dismissive, demanding, like he was owed an explanation. I let a small pause stretch between us, just long enough to remind him that I didn't owe him anything anymore. "You remember when I moved out at 22? I said finally. My mom nodded slowly. "You said you needed space," she replied. My sister let out a short breath. "You moved into that tiny apartment near downtown," she added. "We all thought you were struggling." I smiled slightly. "That's because I let you think that." My dad frowned. "Stop saying that like it's something to be proud of," he snapped. "You lied." I didn't flinch. "I adapted." I corrected again. "There's a difference." He opened his mouth to argue, but I kept going before he could. "That apartment?" I said. "It was the first property I ever invested in." My sister blinked. "You couldn't afford that," she said immediately. "You barely had any savings." I nodded. "On paper? No. But I had something better." "What?" my dad pressed. I met his eyes. I paid attention. That seemed to frustrate him more than any number I could have thrown out. "Stop talking in riddles," he said. "Explain it properly." So I did, but not the way he expected. "Do you remember Uncle Raj?" I asked. My mom's expression shifted instantly. "Your dad's brother," she said. "The one who always talked about risky investments?" I nodded. "The same one you all said was irresponsible. The one you told me to stay away from." My dad's jaw tightened. "He lost money constantly," he said flatly. "He was reckless." I shrugged slightly. "He also understood markets before most people did." My sister leaned forward again. "You're saying he helped you?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm saying I listened to him when no one else did." I could see it clicking for her before it did for my parents. "You learned from him," she murmured. "Not just learned," I said. "I started small. Tiny investments. Things no one here would have taken seriously. While you all were busy telling me I'd never succeed, I was figuring out how things actually worked." My dad shook his head slowly. "That still doesn't explain this," he said, gesturing toward the phone. "That kind of growth doesn't just come from tiny investments." I gave him a look. "It doesn't come from waiting tables either," I said. That hit him hard. My mom sat down fully now, like her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. "So everything you told us," she whispered. "The long hours, the late shifts, were real," I said. "Just not where you thought." My sister narrowed her eyes. "So what were you actually doing?" she asked. I leaned back again, calmer than I'd ever felt in that house. "I was building leverage," I said. "Partnering quietly. Taking risks where it made sense. And more importantly, staying invisible." My dad let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Invisible," he repeated. "You think that's what this is?" I tilted my head slightly. "No," I said. I think this is what happens when no one's watching you closely enough to underestimate you correctly. That shut him up. Completely. My sister looked down at the phone again, scrolling slower this time, like she was trying to catch every detail she'd missed before. You own stakes in developments across 3 states, she said quietly. You're listed in multiple LLCs. Some of these deals. She stopped herself, then looked back at me. These are strategic, she said. This isn't luck. I smiled just a little. I never said it was. The shift after that wasn't loud, it was subtle, and honestly that made it worse. Because for the first time in my life they weren't talking over me, they were studying me. Like I was something unfamiliar. Something they should have understood years ago but didn't. My dad finally sat down, but his posture was different now. Less dominant, more cautious. If all of this is true, he said slowly, then why keep it a secret? And there it was. Not how did we miss this? Not why didn't we support you? Just why didn't you tell us? I let out a quiet breath. Because every time I tried to show you who I was becoming, I said, you reminded me who you thought I'd always be. My mom flinched at that. My sister didn't. She just kept watching me like she was recalibrating everything she thought she knew. My dad shook his head. That's not fair, he said. We pushed you because we wanted better for you. I met his eyes. No, I said evenly. You pushed me toward what you understood. And when I didn't fit that, you dismissed me. Silence again. He didn't argue this time. That's how I knew it landed. My sister set the phone down gently, almost carefully now, like it carried weight. So this deal, she said, her voice quieter but sharper. The one I found, what is it exactly? I paused for a second, not because I didn't want to answer but because I wanted her to understand what she was really asking. It's a controlling stake, I said, in a development project that's about to close its second expansion phase. My dad frowned. English, he muttered. I didn't even look at him. It means, I said, keeping my eyes on my sister, that within the next 6 months that one deal alone will triple in value. That did it. My mom's breath caught. My dad went completely still. And my sister? She leaned back slowly, like the weight of that realization hit her all at once. You're serious, she whispered. You're not just doing well, you're ahead. I gave a small nod. I've been ahead, I said. That sentence lingered in the air longer than anything else I'd said all night. Because it didn't just describe my finances. It rewrote the entire story they had told themselves about me. My dad rubbed his face, exhaling sharply. All this time, he murmured. All this time we thought. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I tilted my head slightly. That I was failing? I offered. He didn't deny it. That was answer enough. My mom finally spoke again, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Why didn't you correct us? She asked. And that question, that one almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it showed how little they understood the dynamic they had created. Because it benefited me, I said simply. They all looked at me at once. My dad's expression hardened slightly. How does being seen as a failure benefit you? He asked. I held his gaze steady and calm. No expectations, I said. No interference. No one asking questions when I made moves you wouldn't have understood or approved of. My sister's eyes narrowed again, but not in suspicion. This time it was something closer to respect. You played the long game, she said. I shrugged lightly. I protected my growth, I corrected. My dad let out a quiet, almost bitter laugh. By making us look like fools, he said. That's when I leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance between us. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. You did that on your own. And for the second time that night, he had nothing to say. What happened next wasn't an explosion. It was something quieter, more uncomfortable. The kind of silence that forces people to sit with the truth instead of running from it. My dad didn't argue this time. He just stared at the table, like every word he'd ever said to me was replaying in his head. But now it sounded different. Wrong. My mom looked between us, clearly wanting to fix it but not knowing how. And my sister? She was still watching me. But now there was something new in her expression. Not judgment. Not superiority. Something closer to calculation. So what now? She asked finally. That question shifted the energy again. Because it wasn't emotional, it was practical, strategic. And for the first time it felt like she was speaking my language. I leaned back slightly, considering her. Now, I repeated. Now nothing changes. My dad looked up sharply. Nothing, he said. After all this, you expect things to just go back to normal? I gave a small shrug. They were normal for me, I said. I just had more information than you did. That clearly didn't sit well with him, but before he could respond, my sister spoke again. You're really just going to walk away from this? She asked. Like none of it matters? I held her gaze. It mattered, I said. It just doesn't control me anymore. That answer seemed to land differently with her than it did with my parents. She nodded slowly, like she understood something deeper beneath the words. My mom reached across the table then, her hand hovering like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch mine. We didn't know, she said softly. If we had. I pulled my hand back before she could finish. Not aggressively, just enough to create space. You did know, I said. Just not the parts that made you comfortable. That one hurt her. I could see it. But it was the truth. And for once I wasn't softening it to protect anyone else. My dad stood up again, restless, pacing like before. But this time it felt different. Less control, more damage control. All right, he said, running a hand through his hair. Fine. You've made your point. I didn't respond, because this wasn't about proving anything anymore. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. But we're still your family, he said. That doesn't change. And there it was. The pivot. The quiet shift from judgment to access. I held his gaze for a long second, letting the weight of that statement settle before I answered. You're my history, I said finally. That's not the same thing. The room went still again. My sister's eyes flicked between us, catching every detail. My mom looked like she wanted to say something, anything, but didn't trust her voice. My dad, though? He didn't hide it this time. The realization. The one he couldn't talk his way out of. So that's it? He asked. You're just done? I tilted my head slightly. No, I said. I'm just no longer available for the version of me you created. That sentence didn't need anything added to it. It sat there heavy and final. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking to keep the peace. I stood up slowly, grabbing my bag like it was just another ordinary night. Dinner was nice, I said calmly. You should celebrate your anniversary. My mom whispered my name, but I didn't stop. And as I walked out that door, I realized something that made everything else feel small. I hadn't just proven them wrong. I had outgrown them completely. I didn't hear from them for 3 days. No calls. No texts. Just silence, the kind that usually meant they were trying to figure out how to rewrite the story in a way that made them feel better. But on the 4th night, there was a knock on my door. Not one voice. Not two. All 3 of them. And when I opened it, they didn't look angry anymore. They didn't look superior either. They looked careful. My dad spoke first, but his voice was nothing like before. We need to talk, he said. My mom nodded quickly, like she didn't trust herself to speak. And my sister? She just watched me the same way she had at that table. Only now there was no doubt left in her eyes. I stepped aside, but not because I had forgiven them. Because this time I was the one in control of the conversation. And the truth? Some doors don't open the same way once you've seen what's on the other side. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or made to feel like you'd never be enough, just remember this. Sometimes the strongest move isn't proving them wrong. It's letting them believe they were right, until it's too late to matter. And if that hit a little too close to home, you already know what to do.